The lie didn't arrive loudly. It slipped into the room wearing a calm smile, a relaxed voice, and a number that sounded just believable enough to pass. The moment he said his age, she felt it in her stomach. That sharp, quiet knowing that has nothing to do with logic. Before we go any further, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from and how old are you? And let me ask you something personal. Have you ever felt someone wasn't being honest with you, even when everything on the surface looked perfect? Because that feeling, that instant awareness, is what this entire story is built on. Her name was Celeste Rowan, and if you passed her on the street, you would never guess she controlled a financial empire large enough to employ thousands. She dressed modestly, drove an older car, and preferred quiet cafes over private clubs. At 63, Celeste had already learned the hardest lesson of her life. Money attracts attention, but rarely affection. After 2 relationships that crumbled the moment her wealth became visible, she made a decision that changed everything. No more titles, no more truth about her net worth. She wanted to be chosen as a woman, not as a prize. That's how she ended up at a small community lecture one evening, listening to a talk on local history she barely cared about, seated beside a man who smelled faintly of cedarwood and spoke softly, like he measured every word. He introduced himself as Daniel Foster. He said he was 70. Said it easily. Too easily. Celeste smiled politely, but her mind paused. 70 didn't scare her. Age never did. Dishonesty did. Daniel was charming in a restrained way. He didn't boast. He didn't flirt aggressively. He asked questions and actually waited for the answers. Over coffee later that week, he talked about wanting stability, about feeling done with chasing and proving. Celeste found herself relaxing, something she hadn't done in years. Still, something tugged at her. His hands were steady. His eyes didn't carry the weight she'd seen in men who had lived 7 full decades. It wasn't impossible, she told herself. Just unlikely. They began meeting regularly. Walks that stretched longer than planned. Dinners where silence felt comfortable instead of awkward. Daniel spoke of past relationships with a careful distance, like someone describing events he'd memorized rather than lived. Celeste noticed how he adapted to her stories instead of adding his own. When she spoke about growing up before certain technologies, he nodded, but never interrupted with memories. If you were in her place, would you ignore that feeling just to enjoy the warmth of connection again? One afternoon, she mentioned a song that defined her 20s. Daniel smiled and said he'd discovered it later in life. The words landed oddly. Later than when? She let it go. Another time, she joked about how her knees reminded her of the calendar every morning. Daniel laughed and agreed, but his laugh came a second too late, like he was learning the rhythm of aging rather than living it. Celeste didn't rush to expose him. She understood why someone might lie about age, especially when love is involved. Society is cruel about numbers, but there was a line she would not cross. She could forgive insecurity. She could not build a future on a false foundation. So instead of confronting him, she watched. She listened. She waited. The moment that changed everything arrived during a dinner with people Daniel called old friends. The conversation drifted toward careers, early ambitions, missed chances. One woman smiled at Daniel and said, "You always talk like someone who started over too early." Too early? Celeste felt the room tilt slightly. She asked gently, "Early compared to what?" The woman looked confused, then glanced at Daniel, then laughed it off with a joke that didn't land. That night, Celeste sat alone on her balcony, city lights flickering below, memories rising uninvited. Men who lied by omission, men who adjusted facts to stay close to her orbit. She realized something painful but clear. Daniel wasn't lying to take advantage of her money. He didn't know about it. He was lying because he thought the truth would cost him her. A few days later, it happened. A small slip. Daniel mentioned his younger brother's graduation year, just a number. But Celeste's mind moved fast. She did the math instantly. Her heart sank, not from shock, but from confirmation. He wasn't 70. He wasn't even close. He was at least 10 years younger, maybe more. She looked at him across the table and saw fear beneath his calm expression. Not the fear of being caught, but the fear of losing something rare. For the first time, Celeste felt the weight of her own secret pressing back at her. Two people, both hiding truths. Two people hoping love would survive the reveal. She knew what had to happen next. No hints, no traps. Just a question asked plainly, with no room to escape. The next time they met, she would ask him to tell her the truth about his age, and depending on his answer, she would decide whether to reveal who she really was or walk away, before lies grew roots too deep to pull out. When Daniel arrived the next evening, he could tell something had shifted. Celeste greeted him the same way, calm smile, warm voice, but there was a stillness in her that hadn't been there before. They sat across from each other, the quiet heavier than usual, like the air before a storm. She didn't ease into it. She didn't soften the ground. She simply looked at him and said, "Daniel, how old are you really?" The question landed between them and stayed there. For a second, he tried to smile it away, the reflex of someone used to adjusting the truth without malice. But then his shoulders dropped, his hands folded together, tighter than before. He exhaled slowly, as if he'd been holding that breath for weeks. "I'm 58, he said. "I didn't mean to lie. I thought if you knew, you'd never see me the same way." Celeste felt a strange mix of relief and grief. Relief that her instincts hadn't failed her. Grief that the connection she'd been nurturing was built on something altered. She nodded, not in approval, not in anger, but in acknowledgement. "Why 70? She asked quietly. "Why not the truth?" Daniel looked down at the table, then back up at her. "Because every time I was honest before, I became invisible. Women my age wanted younger. Women older than me wanted someone seasoned. I got tired of being dismissed before I was known. When I met you, you felt settled. I didn't want to lose the chance before it started. If you were sitting where Celeste was, would you feel sympathy or betrayal?" She felt both. She understood the cruelty of assumptions, the way numbers could erase possibility. But she also knew that trust, once bent, never straightened easily. She sat with that truth for a long moment, then surprised him by saying, "There's something you should know about me, too." Daniel looked up, confusion flickering across his face. Celeste took a breath, steadying herself. "I'm not who you think I am financially," she said. "I'm not comfortable. I'm not just retired. I'm wealthy, very wealthy. And I've hidden it for the same reason you hid your age." The silence that followed was different. Not tense, not fearful, just full. Daniel leaned back, processing. He didn't smile. He didn't reach for her hand. He just looked at her, really looked, as if seeing a fuller version of the woman he already cared for. "So we both showed up wearing armor," he said softly. They didn't resolve everything that night. They talked until the restaurant closed, then walked without direction, letting the city absorb the weight of their honesty. Daniel admitted he'd been afraid of being seen as less. Celeste admitted she was tired of being seen as more. Two different fears, born from the same wound. Over the following weeks, they moved slower, deliberately. No pretending. No shaping themselves to fit an imagined expectation. Daniel stopped trying to sound older. Celeste stopped minimizing her success. They learned each other again, this time without filters. Some days were easy, others were uncomfortable. But every conversation felt cleaner, like breathing after rain. There were moments Celeste questioned whether the lie about age would always linger between them. But she noticed something important. Daniel never defended his choice. He owned it, and he never lied again. Not about his fears, not about his doubts, not even about the moments when being with a wealthy, accomplished woman made him feel small. He said it out loud, and Celeste respected that more than perfection. One evening, months later, They sat watching the sunset, not speaking, just present. Daniel turned to her and said, "If I had told you the truth that first day, would you have stayed?" Celeste thought about it honestly. "I don't know," she said, "but I know this. If you had kept lying, I wouldn't be here now." That was the lesson neither of them expected to learn. Love doesn't require flawless beginnings. It requires courage at the turning point. The moment when the lie can still be undone. The moment when fear can be replaced with faith. They didn't marry quickly. They didn't rush to define what they were. They chose something quieter. Partnership built on choice, not illusion. And for the first time in her life, Celeste felt chosen without conditions. Not for her age, not for her wealth, just for who she was when everything was finally on the table. If this story made you think about honesty, about the lies we tell to be loved, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Like the video if it moved you, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe if you believe real connection is still possible at any age. And don't forget to comment. Where are you watching from, and how old are you today?